Hi, and welcome to Friday's podcast, which we're going to be talking about sales and strategies. Obviously, as former sales director and heavily involved in sales all my life, as an own company and running sales, I see the challenges from both sides of sales. One of the key things I wanted to talk about today, in particular, was really the challenges around there and some key areas. And what I'm going to do in different stages is go through the stages so you can get a better understanding of the key things to think about and obviously consider as sales, because ultimately what a lot of people don't understand, and only today I was doing an audit with a very strong business up in Hull, and it was very clear and evident that most of the sales or most of the exports is going to the sales department, and they're making decisions rightly, wrongly, but obviously they're growing, so obviously they're being very aggressive. But they're making fundamental mistakes that ultimately is costing the company money in the background, and it's not allowing the sales guy to understand and grow that business and control it better. Yes, it's growing, but there's hidden costs there, and we certainly found that today and in lots of other visits I do. So I do understand the challenges of sales. We're not here to criticize sales. We're here just to kind of give you a good kind of pointer, because like I said, most inquiries always go to the sales department, and ultimately the export shipping is the last part of the jigsaw. So how do you change something when it's already been agreed and, I've agreed to sell it, we need to get it out. I don't, they don't understand the transport side of it or anything else, and it causes major challenges within the infrastructure. So the inquiry, from an inquiry stage, what the key things we should be considering within that inquiry. So most exporters we know lose sometimes a deal before they even reply, because sometimes there's a challenge. The first response of anything sets the tone. That's the reality. I put on here most exporters reply with the price. And that's where it goes wrong, because ultimately you need to be asking some very, clear questions there. And I've homed in on three topics just for Friday. I'm going to do this every Friday. Currency, Incoterm, time frame. And you probably think, what relevance do they have within compliance and everything around that? Trust me, they make a huge difference, in getting these right and understanding your sales strategy and understanding your inquiry stage will allow you to probably gain more business. And when you do gain business, or when you move in business, you're getting in more control of that business, because you're making the correct decisions around there. And ultimately, excuse me, if it doesn't get met, or the buyer doesn't want some of these key things, well, you don't do the order. It's as simple as that. So I'm going to cover these simple things. So receiving the inquiry, it's that first second, that first 60 seconds, call it 60 seconds, which defines the deal. It's kind of a bit exaggerated, but it's kind of, making a forefront when we're doing podcasts, just to make you aware. But currency, I mean, you're in the UK, you're delivering goods to Brazil, or you got an inquiry from Brazil, or you got an inquiry from the GCC, say Saudi Arabia, and you're quoting in GBP. Is that the correct currency to be quoting in? Is the different currencies they work towards within their structure? And these are the things you've got to consider. So again, the first question, what currency am I dealing with? Am I dealing in US dollars? Am I dealing in their own currency? Or am I dealing in my currency? Because ultimately that makes a huge difference to the costing. Because if you're costing as GBP, but actually they think it's dollars, there's a mismatch there. So when the price comes over, they see it in a different price. It puts people off because a simple question hasn't been asked. Third one is your Incoterms. Your Incoterms key. Somebody will push it towards you. Yeah, DDP. And you say, yeah, that's how many contracts I see and how many salespeople get involved in the structure of selling, and especially international sales, and accepting certain things that they shouldn't really be accepting. And Incoterms is a key one. And time frame. Don't promise something that you can't deliver. So if somebody's wanting something in 2 weeks and on the other side of Brazil, how are you going to get it there? Well, unless you air freight it, and that's probably just wiped out your whole of your profit, depending on the size of the goods. Do you carry it? Do you use ocean freight? Do you use road transport? These are the key questions to ask. And again, getting these wrong doesn't matter about the price, because you get them fundamentals wrong. The price is wrong anyway from the start, or the instructions are incorrect. So again, it's very important to understand the structure behind it. And I'll go through that. So currency, we'll pick the three topics. So currency, who carries the risk? Most exporters quote in their own currency and then jobs done, but that's not always necessarily the correct structure. And the problem quoting GP when the buyer thinks it's US dollar, exchange rate moves 5% between quote and payment. Who absorbs that? Ultimately you want to look after the buyer. Does the seller or the salesperson hide that quote, hide that structure because he doesn't want to be seen? So again, simple questions. What currency are we dealing with? What currency? Or you have a structure that we only deal in GBP, sterling. You're very clear at the offset it is in GBP, and you make it very clear to the customer, to the buyer. What currency would you like to transact in? Again, you may have a very strict policy, but if it's £1 million order and they want to do with the US dollars, you think about it, don't you? So you make it simple and professional. It signals you understand international trade. Remember, if you're dealing with countries around the world, not everybody wants to be dealing in GBP. They might want to deal in euros. They might want to deal, like you're saying, US dollars because it's easy currency for them to deal with. One thing from a sales point, you should have separate accounts within your system. You should have a US dollar, a euro. Even I have that. Different currencies within your system, and you can fluctuate before that. But again, clear with the strategy. Offer the quote in the currency with validation periods, so building a margin buffer. So again, work out and make sure you're within that. So very, very important. Currency plays an ultimate role. Nobody talks about it, and these are the key things why I want to talk about it today. Incoterms, as my life in Incoterms and being an ICC trainer and delivering Incoterms just recently online to 35 different people around the world in one company, but based in all different countries. The challenges they face when it's Incoterms, and also doing Incoterms training live to different businesses, not just in the UK, but internationally. It's very important to understand that. Incoterm defines on who controls what. So a lot of salespeople will assume when it's X works that it's easy because it's from our factory, it's X works, nice and straightforward. But that's not necessarily always correct because under X works, there's challenges within that. Yes, you put the buyer's responsibility and he might say, yes, I'll do that, no problem. But actually, are there better options there? And the better options on both sides. You may have where they're saying DDP. So you might have them where they say, we will only deal in DDP and it's £1 million order. You get excited, you think, fantastic. But actually, on DDP, depending on where you're delivering it to, you got a duty and a VAT possibility of liability. And if it's 20% or tax, depending on where you're exporting to, but let's base it on an understanding that if it's VAT going into Europe, say Germany, and it's an 18 to 20% VAT, that's going to get billed back to you. So have you got 20% in the margin? They're the key things. I never understand why people do DDP. It's just my own personal. I just think we just create extra work for ourselves for no reason. It's explaining to the buyer what's required from their side, and they can ultimately claim the VAT back like we can in the UK. I recently had, about a year ago, I had a client who'd done some new audit. It was a new contract they had actually in Brazil, funny enough. And what had happened there was they'd done the first order, and it was kind of a sample. So it was an order worth about £3,000. Anyway, I remember Amanda contacted me and said, Richard, we've had the customer in Brazil's not happy. He sent us the invoice he's had for all his charges for customers, and he wants us to kind of take that cost. And he'd been charged around very, very high cost, around 10,000 US dollars for a £3,000 order. The actual cost within Brazilian customs and compliance and everything around there, so customs and all the charges and taxes, was about $10,000. Now, this particular company wanted to really spearhead and get involved in the South American market, and Brazil was a real strategic area they wanted to build. And the first instinct was to say, yes, let's absorb that. We'll take a hit with it because we can get into the country and we can build. And I was like, whoa, hang on a minute. Have you got the invoice? Send me the invoice. Ask them for a copy of the invoice. To be fair, they sent the invoice over and the charges were there. But actually, when I drilled it down, there was about 18 charges on there. It was a ridiculous amount of charges. But around about it's about 8,000, $8,500 was actually reclaimable under the Brazilian government. It was just like a VAT charge, and then you can claim it back from the government. So ultimately, you could have paid them charges of 10,000 US dollars. He could have claimed back his 8,500 because he got the invoice. You would have given the 10,000. He's 18,500 pound better off, and he's paid 3,000 pounds for your products. Work that one out. So again, it's understanding, and again, understanding DDP and these these clear terms. DAP, if you want to do DAP, you can control that and deliver it to the premises. But again, make sure you understand what the risk is for your delivery. So Incoterm is the most important part of any formality. It's so important. You're asking Enquiry, what Incoterms are we offering? Well, you have 3 strict Incoterms. FCA, if it's going collection from your premises, never X works. If it's being delivered to a customer, they want you to control the transport side, CPT or DAP. If it's going by container and they want to have some control of it, you can do FOB or even FCA. Again, there's terms you can use, or you can do CFI if they want you to control the container to their premises, cost, freight, and cost and freight, and take the liability and pass it on to them. So again, the liability with Incoterms is actually the collection of the goods from your premises to the delivery. Who takes that liability? So again, very, very important. And again, asking them clear questions, which are on here, the right conversation. Finally, time frame. I see this often, and the reason I put a couple of things in here is because I see it all the time. The buyer says they need it in 2 weeks. They're urgent for it. It's a massive order. They've suddenly come on to you and we want the goods in 2 weeks. But actually, it's in production. Well, how do you deliver it in 2 weeks if it's in production and it's going to take 4 weeks? You know, there's no rocket science in this. So again, it's been very clear what are the expectations of the delivery. If you're on a production lead of about 20 weeks in your supply chain, you're getting lots of raw materials coming in, and within that supply chain, it's a bit fragmented. So a turnaround of about 12 weeks is now taking 16 weeks. Don't promise something you can't deliver, because ultimately, what will happen, and I put it on here, speak to your freight forwarder who can start working out everything for you. But what will happen is that if you commit yourself to something very quickly, you're going to end up air freighting that. And if it's a large consignment, you're going to spend a lot of money on the air freight, which is going to wipe out your profit. So again, making sure you speak to your freight forwarder if you've got a friendly freight forwarder, and ask them, how long will it take? When are the sailings? How long does it take if you collect it from our premises to deliver? They'll give you a sailing time. And remember, if it's a sailing time, you've got to have the goods in there the week before or 4 days before. So you can't just deliver in the same day. So everything has to be structured. So again, if you're delivering on ocean freight, because it's a better, cheaper price for you, you've got to work out them times. It could take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, 8 weeks to Australia, these kind of things. So don't promise them in 2 weeks when you can't do it. So again, having them up very open conversations, be clear, be honest, be professional, tell the buyer exactly what's possible. There's no reason to lie. Is there? Production, freight, customs, all the things around there that can delay things, and being very, very, confident in your ability to be very clear what you're asking or telling the buyer or the inquirer, because ultimately that creates reputation, and you certainly start then having a bit more of a confidence because you know that these are the questions that a buyer would expect you to be asking. So again, it's very clear to be asking these things. It's part of our weekly strategy. We keep them very short. Monday, it's US risk and tariffs. Wednesday, customs compliance and sales and strategy. Thanks very much for everybody who's been watching our videos. They are growing now. Again, much more people viewing it because it's new. And all we ask is for you to subscribe. That's the only thing we're asking. It's free. We're putting lots and lots of great information on here. And we're going to do this series every week. So we'll do it in 3 stages. Tariffs, customs compliance, sales and strategy. So it gives you a unique following pattern of stages, and we'll do this over a 10-week period, and hopefully by then you'll have a good structure within there. So thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on Monday, and have a great day.